Most people believe that what they tolerate out there doesn't affect what happens in here. But Carl Jung already warned us, what you don't confront inevitably takes control of your life. Accepting toxic behaviors, staying silent in the face of subtle abuse, ignoring small annoyances, all of this silently feeds Jung's shadow. And that shadow keeps expanding, devouring authenticity, sabotaging mental health, and shaping the unconscious. Believe me, every silence of yours becomes a brick in building a diseased inner world. The problem is that this inner world, deformed by concessions, starts determining your choices, your relationships, even your identity. What begins as good intentions, avoiding conflicts, keeping the peace, becomes a destructive habit. And what was once an exception becomes the rule. Jung would call this unconscious destiny. You find yourself repeating the same patterns, attracting the same types of people, and living cycles that drain your energy. Inner transformation only begins when you firmly decide not to tolerate the unacceptable. How many times have you pretended not to see, not to hear, not to feel hurt? Whether at work, in a romantic relationship, or even with your own family. Accepting these destructive behaviors is like allowing poison to seep through the cracks of your soul. One day, this explodes in the form of anxiety, emptiness, or apathy, and nobody understands why. But the unconscious understands, because it records everything, even what you try to forget. And if you think this is an exaggeration, wait until you realize what chronic disrespect can do to the psyche. Few things hurt as much as being ignored where you most need to be seen. Carl Jung knew that the soul gets sick when respect becomes the exception. And the worst part is that disrespect rarely starts with yelling or explicit aggression. Sometimes it comes in the form of silence, subtle contempt, absence when presence was most needed. And then, without realizing it, the person starts accepting emotional crumbs, thinking that's exactly what they deserve. Jung's shadow feeds on this kind of resignation. The problem isn't just the other person, it's what happens inside us when we normalize this type of pain. Depth psychology shows us that when someone repeatedly allows disrespect, it reveals a serious internal disconnection. The person no longer knows who they are. They no longer remember what they deserve. And without realizing it, they start treating themselves the same way, with rigidity, with abandonment, with indifference. Mental health deteriorates, but it doesn't give obvious signs at first. It whispers, then it screams, and when it screams, it hurts deep. Examples? A partner who always has time for everything except you, a boss who invalidates your ideas even when they're good, a friend who only shows up when they need something. Continuous tolerance of these destructive behaviors shapes limiting beliefs in the unconscious. I'm not important. I'm not good enough. And over time, these ideas become emotional truths that are hard to break. But before confronting the other person, you need to recognize the more subtle games, like emotional manipulation, which comes next, hidden under the disguise of affection. Emotional manipulation doesn't usually come with a warning sign. It comes smiling, saying it's for your own good, that no one else will understand you. And then, little by little, the person starts giving in. They give in once, then again, and when they realize it, they no longer know what they truly want. Carl Jung called this loss of will. Jung's shadow doesn't need to scream to dominate. It seduces, confuses, envelops, and feeds on your passivity disguised as love. When someone uses guilt as currency or affection as blackmail, the damage isn't just relational. It's psychic. Manipulation distorts the internal compass, making the person doubt their own instincts. In depth psychology, this type of behavior reveals an imbalance in the ego-self axis. And the most frightening thing is that the more you tolerate, the more you lose authenticity. You start living the other person's narrative until you forget what yours was. And at this point, the unconscious is already dominated by voices that aren't yours. Think of a parent who says, "You disappointed me," just because their child made a different choice, or a partner who threatens to leave whenever you try to set boundaries. These are destructive behaviors. Manipulation can come disguised as affection, but it poisons gradually. And the most dangerous thing is that by accepting this theater, you also become part of the cast, even without wanting to. But what happens when falseness enters the scene, when truth starts getting distorted? That's when the shadow really has fun. Falseness is like a silent virus. It infiltrates spaces of trust and contaminates everything gradually. Carl Jung would say that when you accept lies as something common, the soul starts losing its ability to feel what's true. Truth is essential in the individuation process. Without it, the psyche fragments, and the person moves away from their own center. The shadow loves falseness because it creates masks. And where there are masks, there's no real integration. Small lies, half-truths, omissions. All of this seems harmless at first, but depth psychology shows us that the unconscious records each of these distortions. And over time, the line between what's real and what's manipulated starts to disappear. The person no longer knows who to trust, not even themselves. And this internal noise manifests as anxiety, insecurity, guilt, symptoms that signal that truth has been buried. It's not an exaggeration to say that living among lies destroys mental health. An example, when someone says everything's fine with a fake smile, but their whole body screams the opposite. Or when you live with people who say one thing and do another, and even noticing it, you stay there. These destructive behaviors aren't just external. Sometimes we're the ones who adapt to the false to avoid conflicts. And when the soul gets used to this, it opens space for the next poison, constant victimhood, which disguises itself as fragility, but paralyzes any possibility of inner transformation. Constant victimhood is a subtle trap. At first it seems like just legitimate pain, difficult stories, unhealed traumas, but over time it becomes an identity. Carl Jung already said that what is brought to consciousness manifests as destiny. And whoever clings to the victim role is unknowingly sabotaging their own inner transformation. Depth psychology shows that this pattern is an unconscious attempt to obtain affection, but it comes at a high price. It imprisons the individual in a cycle of powerlessness. Living in this perpetual state is like walking in circles inside your own mind. The person expects the world to fix their pain, but doesn't realize that the antidote requires emotional responsibility. Jung's shadow, in this case, hides behind a sensitive discourse, but it's manipulative, demanding, and incapable of seeing beyond its own suffering. Being alongside someone like this without awareness directly affects your mental health. Gradually, you start molding yourself to not trigger more complaints, and so your energy goes away. Think of someone who always has a ready excuse, a reason not to change, not to try, not to heal. This is the type of behavior that destroys relationships, ambitions, and even authenticity itself. It's hard to confront this, especially when it comes from someone dear. But ignoring this pattern is allowing the collective unconscious to dominate the scene. And right around the corner, another toxic behavior emerges: obsessive control. Because those who feel powerless often try to compensate by assuming absolute control. And this has even deeper consequences. Obsessive control is seductive. It wears the mask of organization, care. I just want to help. But behind that, what pulses is fear. A visceral fear that if you don't dominate everything around you, something bad will happen. Carl Jung saw this type of behavior as an expression of the ego trying to suffocate life's natural chaos. The attempt to control everything and everyone is, in fact, a way of denying the existence of your own shadow. And this comes at a high price. This behavior suffocates environments, drains relationships, and destroys the vital flow of spontaneity. The unconscious, when repressed, starts manifesting in unexpected ways, anxiety attacks, displaced anger, chronic exhaustion. Those who live under the dominion of control rarely rest, and those who live with such a person walk on eggshells. Mental health slowly corrodes because there's no space for mistakes, for improvisation, for the human element. It's the imprisonment of the spirit in the name of order, and order without soul is just disguised rigidity. Think of that father who needs to know where each child is every second, or that partner who checks the other's messages looking for any sign of deviation, or even the professional who doesn't delegate anything for fear they'll do it the wrong way. These are real examples of how excessive control masks a diseased unconscious, but there's an even deeper type of deception, one that doesn't have to do with the other person, but with the relationship you build with yourself, internal dishonesty. And there, things get even more complicated. Lying to yourself is a type of silent poison. At first, it seems harmless, and everything's fine, said just to avoid feeling, a decision made out of fear disguised as prudence. But gradually, this disconnection becomes the norm. Carl Jung warned that lack of authenticity is the fastest path to psychic illness, and when we ignore what the soul whispers, the unconscious starts screaming in other ways: anxiety, confusion, emptiness. Jung's shadow lives off internal lies, and feeding it is the same as denying your own essence. Depth psychology shows us that inner betrayal doesn't need to be scandalous to cause damage. It's enough to follow paths that don't resonate, maintain relationships that have already died, fake joy when the heart asks for silence. It's at this moment that self-deception emerges, an internal narrative that justifies everything except the truth. Destructive behaviors are almost never the loudest ones. Sometimes they're just silent choices made every day, without presence, without awareness, without courage. And the price of this is losing your own authenticity, that unique spark that makes us whole. Want an example? That person who swears they're happy at work but lives with back pain, or someone who insists on a relationship out of convenience, even feeling that their soul has already left. These are symptoms of self-abandonment. Reading Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl can open important doors on this path back. But there's a point where the damage intensifies, when tolerance of the unacceptable becomes an invisible habit. From there, it's no longer a choice, it's self-destruction in silence. There's a thin line between resilience and self-sabotage. When you tolerate what hurts repeatedly without questioning, the unconscious records, this is acceptable. Carl Jung said that what we fail to confront controls us, and it's at this point that silent destruction begins. The person gets used to living in environments that hurt, swallowing words, ignoring boundaries, until one day they no longer know where the other person ended and where they began. The shadow grows in the silence of unnamed concessions, and it always collects the bill. In depth psychology, this pattern is common in those who grew up hearing that they can't complain, have to endure, or better avoid fights. The result? An adult who doesn't know how to protect themselves, who nullifies themselves to maintain external balance, even if it costs their mental health. This internal destruction isn't sudden. It's built gradually through each "let it go," each "it's not that serious." And meanwhile, the unconscious undermines the person's vital force. It dims their brightness, until all that's left is a present body, but an exhausted soul. It's like that woman who smiles at Sunday lunch but cries in the shower every day, or the man who stays in a job that makes him sick just to maintain a status that doesn't even make sense. Tolerance of the unacceptable becomes an addiction. And Jung already told us the first step of individuation is recognizing what hurts and stopping accepting it. But there's something even more subtle in this equation. The unconscious doesn't forget. It records everything you allow, and that's where the most dangerous beliefs start to form. No matter how many excuses the rational mind creates, the unconscious doesn't negotiate with justifications. It observes, records, and transforms what you accept into an internal pattern. Carl Jung said that the unconscious is the shaping force of the psyche, and everything you tolerate becomes a kind of invisible contract with the world. When someone allows disrespect, manipulation, or dishonesty, they're saying, without words, "This is what I deserve." And the internal universe reorganizes itself based on this permission. That's why certain cycles seem to repeat endlessly. Depth psychology shows us that these patterns don't come from nowhere. They're born from repetition. If you tolerate being spoken to aggressively, your unconscious starts reconfiguring your boundaries, making emotional abuse something normal. If you always accept doing more than others, this excess becomes your identity. Jung's shadow loves this process. It hides in the zone of tolerance disguised as understanding. But there is an important detail that few notice. What's tolerated isn't just lived, it's internalized. And this shapes beliefs that sabotage relationships, decisions, and even the sense of worthiness. Want an example? People who, from early on, heard they couldn't complain usually end up in relationships where silence is the rule. Or individuals who grew up being ignored learn not to expect attention and accept emotional crumbs. The book The Gifts of Imperfection by Brené Brown shows how learning to position yourself with vulnerability can rescue authenticity. Because saying no is also a way of loving yourself. But before that, you need to understand what's being accepted today that tomorrow might become a psychic prison. And this understanding opens space for something even more powerful: conscious confrontation. Confronting isn't an invitation to external conflict, but a call to internal integrity. Carl Jung taught that individuation passes through an honest look at the shadow, which means facing what bothers, what hurts, what corrodes. It's in this courage that true respect is found, not the one imposed by fear, but the respect born from authenticity and clarity of boundaries. After all, remaining passive in the face of what destroys is denying your own inner transformation. This conscious confrontation reveals itself as a practice of self-love. It's not easy, of course, to touch wounds, challenge old patterns, break silence. But it's exactly this discomfort that awakens the soul. That person who finally says no to what they don't tolerate breaks a cycle that was undermining their mental health. As Brené Brown says, vulnerability isn't weakness, it's power. And Jung reinforces, only by bringing the unconscious to light does the shadow dissolve. Otherwise, it remains as shadow, obscure and active, influencing without being seen. Imagine then the impact of putting this into practice in daily life. Whether at work, in personal relationships, or even with yourself, this positioning changes everything. Creating clear and firm boundaries is a revolutionary act in a world that demands constant concessions. And that's where real change begins, the kind that doesn't just change the external, but restructures the inner world, bringing the person closer to their authenticity. But attention, being kind isn't the same as being submissive. Being kind is an act of strength, not weakness. We often confuse kindness with submission, and this mistake distances us from our authenticity and true mental health. Carl Jung reminds us that individuation requires balance, being firm without losing gentleness, being assertive without falling into inflated ego. Kindness that accepts everything in the name of peace is a trap that allows toxic behaviors to flourish. And this silently destroys what's most precious within us. In daily life, this confusion appears in simple but decisive situations. How many times does someone stay silent in the face of injustice to avoid a fight? How many times does a person prefer to smooth things over with someone who manipulates, hoping to maintain harmony? These are clear examples of how not tolerating the unacceptable requires courage to say no, without losing composure, to protect yourself, without giving up compassion. Books like Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg are valuable tools for learning this delicate balance. And the most fascinating part, when a person stops tolerating everything and chooses to position themselves with love and firmness, they not only protect their mental health, but also teach the world how they want to be treated. This is one of the great lessons of Jung's shadow. Inner transformation begins with the first no said to everything that destroys, and the yes, dedicated to authenticity. But what's the next step? How does this attitude change the way the world reacts? You'll discover that very soon. Every yes you give to what hurts you is a silent teaching to the world. Carl Jung warned us that the personal and collective unconscious are in constant dialogue, and by tolerating destructive behaviors, you end up reinforcing patterns that distance individuation and mental health. Inner transformation begins when you understand that saying no to what hurts is, in fact, the purest expression of authenticity. It's an act of self-love that reverberates in relationships and the surrounding environment. This teaching is at the same time simple and profound. A practical example: whoever accepts being belittled at work, in the family, or in friendship teaches that self-respect has a low limit. But whoever establishes clear and firm boundaries, even if this causes momentary discomfort, redefines the space around them and invites the other to adjust to these new rules. Jung showed that this process is fundamental to dissolving the shadow, because when the shadow is illuminated by active consciousness, it loses the power to control. And it's in this lost power that true freedom is born. Life, therefore, becomes a daily exercise of choice between accepting behaviors that corrode or positioning yourself to grow. Jung's shadow doesn't disappear on its own. It takes courage to face your own limits, recognize toxic behaviors, and above all, not tolerate the unacceptable. This is the path to a healthy inner world, to individuation, and to an existence that honors who you really are. And so, a new cycle begins. The time has come to apply all of this in your life. Are you really willing to no longer tolerate the behaviors that destroy your peace and mental health? Ask yourself, what patterns have I been allowing that fragment my authenticity? Carl Jung taught us that the shadow only integrates when we face the truth, and only then do we begin true inner transformation. How about starting to say no to what no longer serves you and opening space for what really matters? This change isn't simple, but it's essential. I want to challenge you. How far are you willing to go to take care of yourself? Individuation, this deep process of self-knowledge and healing, begins with small daily choices, with attitudes that teach the world to respect you. If you enjoyed this dive into depth psychology, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next videos that will deepen this journey even more. And to continue this path, how about watching the video that's on your screen now? It will complement everything you saw here and strengthen your inner transformation. After all, the search for balance and authenticity is a path built step by step. And you're not alone on this journey. Shall we go together?